Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon. It's NutBallCop again. How is everybody doing? Um, this video is going to be about taxes, and it's gonna be a long, winding road. A long and winding road. One of those ones. This is complicated. I spent some time. I had some time after I woke up. Grabbed a coffee, read some news. Was thinking about that Mr. Global post the other day where he asked, why don't we just pay people more so they can contribute more into the system? And is that a better balance than taxing the wealthy more? Or what's the formula to get control of this ever-growing debt problem that we have? And when you start talking about debts and taxes, boy, this is just a rabbit hole. While I was researching this for a couple of hours, uh, off and on today, uh, this is something like if I was doing something this complicated with information and data, this would have probably been like a war room, like at my old company. Uh, at the beginning of the lockdowns for COVID, I got assigned to a war room, which is just tech speak for sort of a impromptu group team with a bunch of different talent, whether it be web design, data, parsing, data scraping. That was my job in the war room. I was taking all the live reports that were coming from cities like New York City, London, and other places, and collecting all the data, scraping their very crappy PDFs because at the time nobody knew how to report this data correctly. And some of the cities and states were just horrible. So much missing data at the beginning. Um, we even gave feedback to the New York City Health Department because it was like, you're missing like key, like basic healthcare variables um, in your reporting. And it got better over time. But to pull together like a massive data set all of a sudden and really get your head around the space, it's more than one person's job. And obviously, I'm not a tax attorney. I'm a data geek, law enforcement and military in my previous life. Um, but this would be like that tax attorney, CPA, and she's something else, EA or something like that. She's over on YouTube, always throwing down the YouTubers and the Twitter people who get tax law completely wrong. I'm not going to talk about the law. I'm just going to talk about numbers because that's my thing, is the numbers and the data. Um, but to really get your head around this, you need to talk to some experts. You'd probably need one hell of a data team like we had in our war room for COVID. We got so good with our data so quickly. The London Fire Department was using our website to track data from their city. Um, so when you have a good data team running, you can get answers fast. But yeah, this is the ultimate rabbit hole slash black hole slash pit of despair when you start talking about debt and taxes, because the modern world is so addicted to debt. Um, and I've been saying this for years, and I know it upsets some people because they understand the difference between debt and working capital, but we are addicted to debt, and too many people use debt as their day-to-day capital. That's not what debt is for. Debt is to manage things over time at a reasonable rate. How many people need to be retold again and again and again? Your credit card and its 32% or 36% interest rate is not a personal loan. It's a money management tool. Except when you look at the credit card data now, we're almost near a record. It went down a little bit after the lockdown, but just like student loans, you're talking about neighborhood of $1.5 trillion just in credit debt for Americans: credit cards, personal loans, payday loans, that shit. Um, so we're addicted to debt, and so is the government. We are we are a reflection of the government. The society is a reflection, and we haven't been doing a good job since Ronald Reagan on managing our finances. Um, there's a couple of things you need to go over before you decide, well, how do we start paying down the debt? Well, first of all, you got to understand how we got here. Bank bailouts, failed wars, and corporate welfare for the wealthiest people in the country. Okay. So that's why I became interested in when Mr. Global said this is, oh, we just can't tax the wealthy people even more. I don't know why we can't, um, or why we shouldn't, but the reason we're in so much debt is not just because we provided a free pass to the mega wealthy. It's we reinforce their wealth. Why we literally burn money losing wars overseas, and we watch the banks damage $10 trillion at least. Barney Franks and Ron Paul both use the number of 12 to $14 trillion worth of damage from the bank bailouts. Um, if you think the whole is the average working, you know, Dick or Jane, then you don't live in the same reality I do. Okay. Um, Not only do we allow the bankers and the mortgage companies and the hedge funds to just turn housing into an absolute casino, we gave them a very, very low tax rate to do so. And when they made all the money doing this, the government saw very little of it. Definitely saw much lower than the statutory rate. Okay. And despite we had a booming housing economy, which was literally printing billionaires on the back end, the government was going more and more and more in debt. The dumbest thing I've ever heard in my adult life was when W said, "Go shopping because we're going into a war." I don't know. Why don't we tighten up our belts, tax the people who actually have money, and let's not go completely in debt by another $3 or $4 trillion just for Iraq. Never mind the dozens of other countries we decided to go play in. Everyone, like a lot of people, like I was talking to a guy at bar a couple of weeks ago at the Irish bar down at Danny's, and he was like, "Oh, the wars weren't too bad because it was just Iraq and Afghanistan, and we had to do those." And I'm like, okay, one, we spent a couple of $1 trillion just in Afghanistan for the Taliban to win. That's what happened. And it wasn't just Iraq and Afghanistan. We spent trillions of dollars. I've heard numbers as high between like 6 trillion and 8.5 trillion. That's how much the global war on terror cost us. Okay. Then you take Trump's two tax breaks for himself and his friends. That's $12 trillion. Okay, so when you look at the big number, the $37 trillion debt that's sitting there right now, no one can be reasonably surprised. Since we started piling on the debt under Reagan, it got worse when we got into the 2000s. We literally gave out tax breaks and free money and then went to war. That's not how we won World War II. We won World War II by scrapping metal in backyard gardens, victory gardens. Shopping at the mall didn't defeat the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese. It did not. Okay. Before we go on the tax road, let me pull up this article from USA Today because they did some direct polling. And this is a good primer on like who should pay more taxes. Okay. I'll give you a really good hint. It's not the bottom three quintiles of the economy. Okay. USA Today just did a survey, a poll, whatever you want to call it, and it is exposing that across the board, if you're not in the top quintile, you are economically suffering right now. At some level or another, you're not making it the way you used to. Okay. It's especially harder for people who don't have a college education. I guess I'm an outlier on that one. I don't have a college education. I've never spent a day. Well, it's not true. I took like visual basic courses and public speaking courses at community college, but I wouldn't call that attending college, like my kids or my wife did. They all have master's degrees. I did fine in my life without a degree, being a techie and a data geek and security and networking and system ops, data centers, all that kind of stuff. People still call me out of the blue and they want me to run down to a data center and go fix something for them. it's been quite profitable. Okay, so I did okay, but I know um, that's an outlier. Most people who don't have a college education are suffering enough. And what's really irritating is this interview Trump did this week where he said inflation is gone. The quote is, "Inflation is essentially gone. Dear leader porn star Humper is essentially full of shit." Okay, inflation is not gone, and he graded himself an A plus 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 on the economy. This is gaslighting. This is telling you to fuck off. This is a mafia grade con artist, and he does it so well. So here's where where should we pay down the debt? And I'm leaving out of the conversation. Where do we get the runtime money? I'll get to that later. Um, but I think Mr. Global's point was, how do we get the debt under control before it destroys the dollar? Because anybody says, hey, you got to watch out. There's a risk to the currency itself. Yeah, that's something that concerns me greatly. Um, I could totally see wake up and we're in a total currency crisis because for decades we decided that debt was working money and we didn't have to care about how much debt we piled up. But where we're going to get the money out of, this is the hard part. The Century Foundation poll, which USA Today is reporting, is saying that out of registered voters, 29% of registered voters have delayed or skipped medical care over the past year because they simply can't afford it. That includes almost 50% of 30 people under 30 years old, 37% of Hispanic voters, and 32% of Black voters. That means the kids coming out of college and kids coming out of high school and in the trades and getting into the trades and coming into the workforce, they're doing worse than, in general, the general population is doing worse than the trailing minorities. Okay, that's a key indicator. That's a key indicator. 24% saying they're delaying or skipping buying medicine prescribed by their doctor. 64% of poll respondents said they have switched to cheaper groceries or cut back on groceries. That includes 79% of the respondents under the age of 30. Old Gen Xer here. Real close to being a boomer, but not. Okay. The generations past us have nothing. Unless they're in a wealthy family, unless they're basically a trust fund rat, they have nothing. If you're skipping medicines and cutting back on your food choices at the grocery store, and you're skipping both medicine and medical appointments, this is a huge warning. Um, 34% of registered voters said they have skipped a meal to save money. Now we're talking real poverty stuff. Okay. 54% of voters younger than 30 said they're skipping meals. 47% of respondents have tapped into savings to meet daily expenses. That includes 59% of voters under the age of 30. Okay. The millennials in the alphas are hosed. Okay. So the proposal of paying them a little more money so they can pay a little more taxes, they're still underwater. Okay. Blood from a turnip, maybe? Trying to extract something that's not really there? That could be a problem. Um, yeah, cutting back on food purchases. 79% of under 30s cutting back on food purchases. 72% of women cutting back on food purchases. 71% of Hispanic respondents cutting back on groceries. 74% of Black respondents cutting back on groceries. Okay. Um, And this is scares me because I know the statistics for Gen X and retirement. Half of the Gen Xers have absolutely nothing for retirement. Nothing. Now, why they have nothing is a lot of reasons. It's medical bills, it's layoffs, it's family problems, it's medical problems and substance abuse problems. Cost of living, some locales is causing that. There's a lot going against Gen X, and the problems that we faced have just been amplified to a wholly worse place for the generations that followed us. Um, and remember that dear leader came in office and said, "I'm going to reduce cost of living, the cost of groceries, and eliminate your taxes on Social Security, overtime, and tips." Okay. Yet, a lot of that didn't happen. And almost two-thirds of the respondents under 30 are tapping into their savings just to meet daily expenses. Okay. So, where you get the money is very, very critical to this discussion. And I'll throw in early, and we'll go back to talk of this later, that Warren Buffett has been repeating for years. He said this the last confab before he retired. It was the confab after Charlie Munger died. And complete disclosure here, I'm a massive fan of Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett. They're at times I think they're the two last capitalists in America. Warren Buffett was telling a story that, after Charlie died, there's, one less person that can sign the big checks, right? Um, so he goes, yeah, I had to pay my whatever it was, $6.2 billion federal tax payment because they don't take all the deductions because Warren refuses and Charlie refused when he was alive to take some of the more bullshit deductions on the corporate side. And yeah, they pay a lot of tax. Um, and he just laid it out there again in that confab. It was if corporations would just pay their statutory rate, there wouldn't have to be an income tax. Now, I can get into the histrionics of the income tax, like there wasn't an income tax at the beginning of the country. The income tax started because the banks crashed the economy, and the wealthy and the robber barons crashed the economy in the Great Depression. So they said, let's help us, America, recover, and we'll have a 1% federal tax that, quote, will never go up. What are you paying in federal taxes now? 24, 32 times one? You're paying a lot more than 1% now. Anybody who's hitting up happy hour, salute. Um, Black Label Scotch here today. Um, so you have to kind of understand, first of all, when you look at a data problem like this, you got to understand the scope of the problem first. And the first thing I dwelled into was, okay, first of all, how many working Americans are there, and how much money are they making at the median level, the 50th percentile? Well, if you just take the salaried working adults, that's about 160 million. There is another 16, 17. I called it 16 in my math here. I'm sorry, 17, 18. We called it 18, I think it was. So there's, well, we'll get to the actual numbers of there. You've got another set. You got 160 that are getting paychecks from a company as a salaried employee. That's 160 million Americans. Okay. Then you've got another, yeah, 16 to 17 million self-employed individuals in the U.S. workforce. I've run my own company for years. I even have kept my company open when I was working elsewhere, like at a big tech company. My last job that I did long term for 5 years. Um, so I get paid. I pay myself through a sole proprietorship, so I would fall into that 17 million self-employed category. So for working adults, we're looking at about 177, 178 million people that are employed. Okay. Uh, so once you understand how many people there are, you have to understand what they're earning. And the median household income, this comes from the Census Bureau, this comes directly from census.gov, is $83,730. Well, thank you very much, C. James. Not talking about the police right now. Whatever. Um, and if you think you can be critical about the police, you haven't watched or read me yet. Okay. So once you contain yourself before you learn a little bit more about my stances. Okay. So, anyways, median household income 2024 US census.gov is 83,730. Keep your mouth going and you're going to get booted. Okay. You want to contribute to the conversation? I'm fine with that. If you just want to randomly shout out stuff, you get to go. Um, so we have 78 million paycheck earners. Um, we have an estimated annual income. It really depends on what number you look at. The if you take like some of the private numbers and you do the weekly paychecks, you get about 64,000. If you use the census data, which is the self-reported data that's double checked against ADP and stuff, that runs out about 83,000. Okay. Um, so working Americans uh, have about half the GDP. Our earnings are about half the GDP. Um, Now let's talk about tax brackets because you also have to know that we claim our tax system is progressive, kind of is really the way we do it in real life. It is not. It's not whatsoever. Um, so if the 10% bracket is 0 to 11,600, the 12% bracket is 11,600 to 47,000, the 22% bracket is 47,000 to 100,000, and your 24 percent bracket is 100,000 to 191,000. Your 32 and 36s are above that, but those are big step gaps. They're 250, $450,000. Um, so at the median tax rate, the marginal tax rate after your normal standard deductions and all that stuff is about 22%. So what does that total up in a a real payment? The average wage earner federal, after all things are said and done, is paying about $10,427. Okay. Um, and I want to make it clear, I'm not talking about FICA. Okay. FICA pays for Social Security and Medicare. When they keep saying, oh, all we got to do is get rid of Social Security and Medicare and we solve the debt problem, they're lying. How do I know they're lying? Ronald Reagan even said they're lying. Okay. He went off during an interview one day and he goes, do you not know how the tax code works? FICA taxes are a separate payroll tax. It has nothing to do with the general obligation or the general obligation debt. It has nothing to do with the war debt. Okay. The money that flows in is used to pay out. The surplus goes to the trust fund. Okay. It's literally two separate accounts by law. Okay. So we're not talking about anything to do with FICA at the moment. Okay. So what we're going to work off of here is we have 178 million paycheck earners. They have a median income of $83,730, and they pay roughly $10,400 in taxes per year. So what happens when we pay them a little more so they can pay a little more taxes? Because I guess the theory here is because Yeah, we're talking the lion's share of American. There's what, 330 million ish of us. Okay. Working adults are 178 million. That's about half. Okay. And it's also half the GDP. Okay. So if you get half the country paying a little more taxes, you should have a groundswell of taxes and revenue paid into the system. That's the theory I think Mr. Global was going after. Okay. Um, But when you start looking at, even if you were to pay them a little bit more and build out a table, and I'll throw some of these tables into the comment after I'm done with the video, so you can look at some of the outputs here. But let's say you give a person a 5% increase, the median worker a 5% increase. They're only going to pay $900 more in taxes a year. Remember, our debt is 37 trillion. The Iraq War cost us, by numbers said by people on both parties, Iraq War cost us $6 trillion. Afghanistan cost us two. The bank bailouts cost us somewhere between 10 and 12, most likely. 10 and 12 trillion. That's trillion with a T, not billion with a B. T. That's how addicted we are to debt. We don't have a couple of $1 trillion in debt. We have tens of $1 trillion in debt. So, what would it take for the US workers to like start paying in a lot more? Like, let's say if we could get them to pay $1 trillion more in taxes per year, because I'm following Mr. Global's idea here, we increase the salaries of the median worker to a level that they could pay $1 trillion more in taxes a year. Okay. I actually calculated this and it actually surprised me. We're talking, let me find the exact percentage here. Um, we're talking having to increase people's earnings at the median level by about 32%. Okay. As layoffs are the biggest business plan of 2025, how are we going to get people to get paid, get the employers to pay the median worker? How are we going to get them to pay them 32% more so they can pay $1 trillion more in taxes? Now, even at $1 trillion a year, additional taxes paid into the system, it would still take us, if we put all that money, all the delta, the differential of the taxes that are now being paid in more because people are making more money, it would take us approximately 50 years to pay down the debt we have now. 50 years, even if we raised $1 trillion a year more. Okay. And when I just, and the only thing that especially the far right nut jobs are willing to cut is Social Security and Medicare, which isn't the money I'm talking about. Okay. They want to cut out the things that simply support the middle class and prevent elderly poverty. They want you suffering. That's their game plan. They want you poor, suffering, desperate, and easy to control. And they've been very successful thus far in doing that. So even if you gave everybody a massive 32% income elevation and they paid their rate they're paying now, okay, it would still take us 50 years to pay down the debt. So is paying people more on the working class level, even the upper middle class, members of the UMC, old Bob Seger song, members of the UMC, Live Bullet, greatest live album, one of the greatest live albums of all time. Um, so is raising people's salary so they can pay more rate, is that a real solution to the debt? I know it's complicated, and I'm not whatsoever yelling at Matt and saying, "Oh my God, you're wrong." Blah, 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 blah. Okay, I'm just saying it doesn't seem to add up. Okay, we're still behind this massive, massive, massive eight ball of debt, and even if we increased it 32%, which I put that probability at less than 1%, that Amazon and uh, Microsoft and Ford and everybody else, okay, is going to boost people's pay just so they can pay more taxes. Because effectively, an increase of 32% would be a bigger increase than taxing the corporation or your employer in the first place. That's where it gets weird. That's where it gets really complicated. Okay. So, is this a real plan going forward? Yeah, kind of. But how much of a dent does it really put into the problem? Not much. Not much at all. Um, Hold on just 1 second, looking for something here. Okay. Trying to figure out something here. Okay. So the wages would rise. Okay, but if you have to raise wages by 32%, prices would rise significantly. So you'd be paying more taxes, and then you would be paying an inflationary factor on that rise of income for the median employee. It's a trade-off. Who comes out ahead? Not too sure. Um, because if wages rise, where you actually get the money is from the high income earners. Okay, because one thing that the Fox Noise pundits and some of the wealthy commentators say is actually true. Yeah, the wealthy do pay most of the taxes. The problem is the corporations don't pay their fair share, and the ultra wealthy are just simply untaxed because they can frame every transaction into a non-taxable vehicle. Okay, everything from carried interest deductions to um, delays and paying taxes on stock grants, um, resets on values when their kids or grandkids inherit their money. I don't think a lot of people understand this. That if you give your grandchildren a bunch of stock, let's say, a bunch of equity, okay, in a company. Let's say you bought Apple in 1990 for $15. Okay, when you transfer that tax to your kids or your grandkids, they get a reset. They get a bump up, which means their profit margin and their taxable space starts on today's, the inheritance date's value of the stock, not the value of the stock when the grandparent or the parent bought it. Okay. Same thing is true with houses. Okay. If you turn around and your parents give you a house, the value of the house resets for capital gains to the current value of the house. So if your parents bought the house for, $300,000 and you could turn around and sell it for 2.5 million today, your capital gains is based on 2.5 million, not the original sales price. So your capital gains window is incredibly small in that situation compared to other transactions for capital gains. And I'll get to capital gains a little bit too. That really muddies the water. um, because if you can't elevate enough workers to that very high level of paycheck earning salaries, and that's remember the medium's 83. I'm talking about people who make six figures and more. Okay, unless you can bump up a whole bunch of people into that six-figure category, and they can pay fully their rate we're talking about now, 22%, their marginal rate. That's the only way this would work. But our companies, corporations, employers, yada, are they going to pay that increase so we can pay more taxes? I find that doubtful off the top of my head. I really do. Um, because where the quote unquote missing money is, it's not with the people who earn a paycheck. Like, I think it's Chris Rock's old joke. Okay. When he tells you the difference between rich and wealthy, Shaquille O'Neal is rich. The guy that signs his paycheck every 2 weeks, he's wealthy. Okay. The ownership class who writes the check to rich people, they're the ones not paying any taxes. And there's scenarios where it's so ridiculous how much tax they don't pay. Like, let's go back into FICA for just one moment. Remember the payday that Elon Musk wanted, and the judge in Delaware threw it out, the $53 billion payday? Do you realize that Elon Musk, if he'd gotten a $53 billion payday, his taxes for FICA would have stopped at a $167,000? He would only pay what, the 6.5% payroll taxes? He would only pay that on the first $167,000 of $53 billion. And then they point their finger and go, look what you did. Look what all you broke the economy with Social Security because you didn't fund it. We fund it with every paycheck. We fund it by law and required withholding. If our employer doesn't withhold payroll taxes, they can go to jail. So what did you do? You rigged the system, stop the FICA at 176,000. So when a CEO takes $100 million payday, he only's got to pay taxes not on the 100 million, but on $167,000. Okay, that's the big gap. And the loopholes are endless. Once you have enough money, I've done pretty good in my life. I'm not even close to playing these tax games the very wealthy do. Okay, capital gains taxes are taxed at a completely different rate than income. Okay, the very wealthy don't earn an income; they only receive dividends. So the income tax doesn't apply to them. Getting the con yet? You have corporate distributions that are untouched. You have this carried interest bullshit where a company, especially property developers, okay, who is a property developer? Dear Leader Pornstar Humper, okay, they can take 7 years, bundle all their losses, and pretend they didn't make any money. And they can decide what years they didn't make any money and pay virtually no taxes. Stock buybacks. Why the fuck aren't stock buybacks taxed? One, they're stock manipulation. If I was in Congress, one of the first bills I'd put in is banning corporate stock buybacks, because all it is stock manipulation run by the board. Okay. And if I couldn't get people to outright ban stock buybacks, I would tax the living shit out of them at the short-term capital gains rate, which I think now is what, 36, 32, 36%, something like that. Far higher than their normal rate. And like, a working family can't do loss harvesting for tax purposes. That's freaking rare. Sure, I get to write off, like this year I had to spend a lot of money. It's been years since I bought a lot of computer gear. My old hypervisor broke. That was like 13 years old. A hypervisor is just a really, really big server that runs multiple virtual machines on it and virtual appliances and headless code processors and all that stuff. So I went out and bought a new server, plus the parts I added into it. There went 20 grand quick. Then I built my new Ultra Perf, the one sitting right here, new Ultra Perf workstation with a 5090 RTX gigabyte GPU in it. Probably it's by far the most powerful workstation I've ever built in my life, and I love building powerful machines. That was $7,200. Then my laptop broke. It was my year. So I said, fuck it, I'm not buying another expensive thing. I bought a little simple Dell Aspirion utilitarian laptop from Amazon for like $690 on sale. I was tired of spending money. And then my battery burned out. So I just had to spend almost $1,000 on new batteries for my battery backups in the house. So yeah, I get all my cost of goods sold and I get my business expenses and yada, 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 but I don't actually get to do loss harvesting like a property developer does or a hedge fund does. Okay. So when they say the tax system is fair and progressive, in real life, maybe on paper it is, but in real life, with all the cutouts, the loopholes, and all that crap, the people who, even though I know they're paying the lion's share of the taxes anyways, and they should, they're the ones with all the money. Okay, what did I just talk about? Okay, they're taking money out of their working savings to pay daily expenses. They're skipping meals. They're skipping doctor's appointments, and you want them to pay more taxes? That doesn't sound like a really good idea to me. I get where you're going. And again, I'm not yelling at anybody. I'm just saying the math is tough. And at first order, at least, it's not adding up. Um, so should we just pay people more so they can pay more in taxes? Yeah, but the amount you need, that 32% to earn $1 trillion extra so we can start paying down the debt with that $1 trillion extra a year, that's a 50-year window. Is that really a solution? And do you realize that full $1 trillion after inflation? Probably not. Probably not. Okay. For years, and I'll tell you flat up, this comes from the time I lived in West Germany. They have a VAT system there, a value added tax, a sales tax. The was the Mehrwersteuer when I was there. Okay. Fortunately, we didn't have to pay it because we were on the status of forces agreement and we didn't have to pay German taxes. So if Legal like bought a car on the German market, we could file our paperwork and get our Mehrwersteuer back. But you only did that on big purchases. You went out and went to the Fußgänger zone, the walking mall downtown, and you buy a pair of slacks and a nice sweater, in the winter for the holidays, so you can go to parties and stuff, and you spend a couple hundred Deutschmark. You're not filing for your Mehrwersteuer back on that. But you buy a car, yeah, sure. You're definitely filing for hundreds, if not 1,000, Deutschmarks back in taxes. Um, I tend to lean towards, and I tend to like the idea of a flat tax. Now, I don't know whether it should be a flat income tax or a consumption tax, like a VAT. Okay. And the reason I lean toward that is, again, in working parlance, our progressive tax code is not very progressive. It's causing us to go into debt literally every quarter at a faster and faster pace. Now, it does not help during Trump 1. He passed $8 trillion worth of welfare for himself, his family, Jared Kushner, and his crypto buddies and his cabinet. Then he turned around this administration, did it again for $4 trillion. Okay, so that's just $12 trillion hole just in 2 administrations by one guy. Okay, and I already mentioned W told us to go shopping before we invaded Iraq because somehow, if I shop at Macy's, we pay for the Iraq War. Well, we went to Macy's and we shopped and we went trillions of dollars in the hole and we didn't win. Should we have instead shopped at Neiman Marcus? What should we have done with our shopping to win the war? Okay. What we did was just go to war half-ass, not listen to the generals. Okay. By the way, General Shinseki was correct. Just like to remind everybody that. Okay. You fired the general who was correct. That's how we ended up losing all those troops after we declared mission accomplished. Okay. So we just keep spending money. We keep getting in debacles and saying that this is absolutely a core requirement. We must do this. We must spend the money. Then you refuse to collect the revenue. Okay. And this is something I will firmly stand on and I will debate very strongly with people. We've never had a spending problem. You spent the money. Now you got to pay your bills. The only problem you had was a revenue problem. And we can go back to tax bill after tax bill after tax bill, Reagan dumping the corporate and the top end income tax rates, just waylaying them. And they may have been a little too high. I'll concede that. But what Reagan did and the debt he caused was so bad, his successor, H.W. Bush, immediately raised taxes, called it voodoo economics. And it was. Spending money and thinking growth will pay for your debt is voodoo economics. It's never worked one fucking time. We're still passing tax bills, including the big, beautiful bill, the big bankruptcy bullshit bill, claiming that growth will work its way out of the black hole we've created. It's a lie. It's a proven lie that's right there in front of us in real life. So my idea with taxes, and it's an idea, okay? Why don't we throw the tax code out completely? Take the 4,200 pages of the tax code, put it into a burn barrel, pour some diesel over it, and light the thing fucking on fire. Then we write a simple 10-page tax code that says very basic things. A dollar is a dollar. It doesn't matter if you're rich. It doesn't matter if you're getting a $53 billion payday. It doesn't matter if you're a job creator. A dollar is a dollar. And the tax on a dollar earned, on a dollar realized as income, as working capital, is 18%. Okay. One, right off the top, Americans will save a couple of $1 billion a year from not having to play the income tax filing game, which, by the way, most of our Western allies don't have to play. A lot of countries just go, hey, this was your income. This was your dividend from your bank. This is our stated tax rate. You're all good. You'll be getting a refund check, a small refund check in a couple of months. Or, hey, we didn't see those last couple of tax payments from your self-employed business, so you owe us this year. Okay. Now you can dispute it. There's a legal way of disputing the automated payment systems, but for the most part, they're correct and people pay them, and it's all good. Okay. So you get rid of the headache, the expense of having to file taxes every year because it's so simple. It's just earnings realized times 18%. Done. Okay. No loopholes, no separate FICA tax, no carried interest deduction, uh, no saying that your money is not taxable because you made too much money this year. That's the exact scenario I was describing with Elon Musk and his $53 billion payday. He's making too much money. We can't tax him. That's funny. You never say that to us. We can never make too much money to tax. You will literally tax us till you take away our houses via property taxes when we're old. Okay. So don't give me the excuse you can't tax somebody because they're too wealthy. That's a stupid excuse. And I mean, a dollar is a dollar. Okay. You bought, because this is what happens with the ultra wealthy. They go to New York City to these pencil towers and they buy an entire floor condo, back in the 90s or early 2000s, and they'll spend $80 million on the purchase of the condo, the full floor condo, and never live in it. They buy full floor condos like they buy massive art purchases just for the investment value. Okay. Meanwhile, a pencil condo pays about a fourth of the taxes of a working class condo in Brooklyn to the city of New York. There's a whole documentary on that on YouTube. I got to go find the link to it again, but it's bad. It's bad. Okay. You get the international wealthy class in the pencil towers, uh, paying minimal taxes. Okay. Then when they sell the property, then because they're wealthy enough to play all the games, they pay a very minimal rate, if anything, on the sale of that condo when they made $40 million selling it 15 years later. The condo isn't $80 million anymore, or $90 million, it's $125 million. Okay. But with all the false tax games that they throw in just for the ultra wealthy, things that you can't do if you tried, they pay so little taxes based on a dollar. Micro trading. Okay. You want to make you're an investment house. You have a supercomputer in New Jersey. Oh, by the way, on CNBC, when you see the traders floor, nothing happens there anymore. That's a performance theater for the financial geeks. Okay. 99.9% of the trades are done on computers, most of it automated, most of it in northern New Jersey, not even in Manhattan anymore. Okay. But say you micro trade and you're doing 1,000 trades a minute. Okay. Well, if you realized an income from any of those trades, 18%. Right now, they can roll their trades for 20 years, never pay any taxes on them. I mean, and if they're saying like we're so poor, we're in trouble, we got to pay for these things, the debt is out of control, um, then why aren't we making any effort to actually generate a big enough income from again the people who can afford to pay without getting hurt? You start taxing the under 30 crowd who's already dipping into their savings for daily expenses while skipping medicine and doctor's office visits. You're going to tax them to lower their quality of life further. You're not going to tax the guy who owns $100 million full floor condo in New York City, okay, on Central Park, who doesn't even live in that condo. They live in London or they live in Dubai. You're not going to consider taxing them. I think that's wrong. Wrong to the point you keep doing it this direction. It's going to become inhumane. So yeah, you want to micro trade your ass off. But every dollar you realize as income, you pay 18%. And trust me, 18% is a massive tax increase from what they're paying now. Look at the Panama Papers. Look at all the other paper drops we have. We had like a half a dozen of them that happened 10 years ago. Everybody seems to have forgotten that already. They simply hide their money, hide it in shell corporations, hide it in Panama, the Grand Cayman, Dubai, Monaco, and then they go, oh, I didn't make that money. Somehow on paperwork, they never made the money. Even though at one point someone had to write them a goddamn check that was a profit, that was actionable income, yet they still don't pay any taxes on it. They get you because, again, you're statutorily required to withdraw it from your paycheck. Okay? Try not withholding FICA on your paycheck. Try that at work. Now, you can claim zero deductions on your income tax if you have enough deductions. I've done it before. Okay? But you can't zero out your FICA. But when you're $100 million a year, $1 billion a year, $53 billion payday kind of guy, and all the taxes stop at $67,000 for $167,000 for FICA, you can obviously see the gap. Okay. Um, and I mean a dollar for dollar. I don't care what your job is. I don't care what your business is. If you've actioned a dollar of income, you pay 18 cents in taxes. Now, 18% on $100 million bonus. Right now, according to the Panama Papers and everything, you got executives are paying single digits in effective income tax rates. This would force an 18% payment into the system to pay down our debt and pay for services. And maybe get ahead of paying for the trillion, $2, $3, $4 trillion war we're going to start in South America as a distraction to the Epstein files. Because it isn't about cocaine and fentanyl if you're grabbing oil tankers. Okay, you're a little confused on what you're fighting down there, but you're about to spend trillions of dollars. Okay, so you got $37 trillion. The Venezuelan, the tax cuts, you're going to have at 40 by the end of this administration. We invade Venezuela, you're going to be at 43, 44 trillion. With the tax code you have now. A tax code where the ultra wealthy pay single digit effective tax rates. You did a $2 billion stock deal out of your family trust, 18% of $2 billion. You did a $50 million flip on a shopping mall, On an office park, okay, on a condo development, 18%. You don't get to stick that money in a carried interest fiasco and then build up enough losses so you can pretend you didn't make any of that money. 18% on every automated trade. So now you have to ask yourself, okay, I'm honestly taking Mr. Global's idea into consideration here. Um, but we need a 31%. Yeah, I finally got the right numbers. 31% wage growth to hit $1 trillion a year in extra income so we can start paying down the debt. Even with $1 trillion more, it's going to take us 50 years to pay down the debt. That's if we don't invade Venezuela. If we invade Venezuela and start a pan South American war, who knows how much this is going to cost? Oh, and if you thought the Iraq insurgency was bad, wait till you get into Venezuela. It's going to be far worse. Okay. Um, is it really practically possible to raise everybody's income by 31%? I'm thinking probably not. Okay. And I don't think it's even politically probable. Highly, highly unlikely you'll get even Democrats to sign on to something like this. And it does cause a debt reduction, but it's a very, very, very slow debt reduction. Okay. Now, on the 18%, it's an idea. It's not an answer. It's not a dictum. It's an idea. Okay. We hit all flows of profit. We're not taxing a transaction. We're not taxing an investment. We're just taxing the profit. When you take an income realization, whether it's an income or a capital gain, a proceed or a dividend, the 18% flat tax applies. Okay. So instead of increasing by $1 trillion because we raised the incomes of middle class and upper middle class paycheck earners, we start taxing the flow instead, no matter where it comes from. Mr. Global, back of envelope numbers. Like I said, if we were really going to do this, this would require getting a tax attorney, getting a war room of data engineers, and probably a data scientist, an actuary involved. But some back of envelope, you can't hit $1 trillion with Mr. Global's idea, but it's going to cost you 31% more wages. If we just taxed every dollar like a dollar, we're somewhere between 3.1 and 3.5 trillion dollars. 3x more than you would get by raising the median income. Okay. Now, does my 18% flat tax solve the debt problem? Complete admission. No, no, it does not. Especially if we decide to invade Venezuela. And all bets are off if we instigate a war with China. Okay. Because the only way a war with China is happening if we instigate it. You replace the corporate tax, FICA tax, income tax, capital gains tax with a flat flow tax. If you've realized income, you owe money. Okay. And that is a much easier path to a surplus $1 trillion per year. And you could, if you could really nail down the system and get the revenues in properly, you could be seeing a multi-trillion-dollar variance from what we're collecting now. Because again, it's not a spending problem, it's a revenue problem. After you make the decision, I tell my friends this: you bought the fucking Mercedes. Don't whine about it now. Okay, you knew what your income was, you knew what you were spending. Too late, pal. Either pay your fucking bill and pay your car insurance, or watch the repo guy come on with a tow truck and take your car back. Okay, you made the purchase decision. You made the financial move. Deal with it. What I like about the 18% is I do think it's a lot more fair than the fake progressive tax system we have now. And I have gotten, even from my very close friends, they're like, oh, they always respond, well, what about the poor? Well, I know the poor pays more on commodities, but flat tax wouldn't be on medicine, food, and staple. Okay, which most of their purchasing goes to. You don't tax their rent payment. Okay, you would only tax the renter, the landlord's income from the rent. Okay, you don't tax medicine and food. Okay, at the grocery store, of course, you pay a tax when you go out to eat. You know, a service meal, service provided meal. But I think you get a much stronger revenue stream, potential multiple stream on the 18% flat tax. But to protect the people I know who are in trouble, okay? Like I said, I'm a data geek. I have a census key. I know about my neighbors because I've looked up my whole area with our cities, gone through the zip plus 4 data, and realize that some people in my town, this is a very expensive place to live, they make less than $36,000 a year as head of household. That's a third of the people who live in my town. Okay. Bottom quintile, zero tax. Okay. That would be my offering to the progressives and the liberals. Just don't tax the bottom quintile at all. Okay. In fact, if they happen to get caught up in a payment, just like I was talking about the Mehrwersteuer, give it back to them. Have them set up on a registry. They go, oh yeah, you're ineligible to pay the 18%. You bought something. Here's your money back. It's going to go back to your fintech app or your PayPal, your Venmo, your Bank of America account, whatever you want, your BMO account. Just register your account. We'll send you your tax money back in 30 days. Okay, because taxing the bottom quintile just so you can pay them social benefits and a social safety net is dumb. Okay, minimize the stuff you're paying for quote unquote welfare, give them more of an opportunity to spend their own dollars, and then find where the gaps are after that. Okay, so I would make that compromise. You know, again, if I'm pretending and put on, I got you were all crazy enough to elect me to Congress. I would say, hey, I want a flat tax. I want to get rid of the old tax code. Bottom quintile, nothing. They pay it in transaction level, but they can get it back directly as an electronic payment at the end of the month. Um, and this unpacks a lot of the barriers to income, the barriers to revenue that the government has. There is just too many loopholes. There are too many just outright handouts in the tax code. And they're delivered like they're like Trump's delivering pardons. They're all based on quid pro quo. Okay. Most of the time it's just campaign money, campaign donations. But we're seeing from current arrests that are going on, it doesn't always include campaign donations. Okay. Sometimes they get into much deeper frauds. So the reason why we have these loopholes weren't in the interest of the economy, interest of the national finance or national security. It was because a campaign donor wanted something out of a politician. And it's getting very incestual. Like Trey Gowdy plays golf with Trump. Trey Gowdy is representing the Democratic corrupt House member in Texas, where he and his wife took money from banks that did business with cartels and the worst state-owned corporation on the planet in Azerbaijan. Um, all it took was nice swing, Mr. President. Pardon my client, since we're buds. Okay. Now the quid pro quo there, and Trump says it aloud on Trump 2 Social hours later. Why didn't you immediately re-register as a Republican? He thought giving the pardon would be a quid pro quo that he would get another vote in the House. And remember, he pardoned him before he even went to trial. Okay. The tax code carve outs, the handouts, the corporate welfare, the subsidization of the ultra wealthy. That's exactly how they got their sweet tax code. The tax code, again, which doesn't apply to you. I don't see Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk on my viewer list here. Okay, so all y'all, this their tax life, their tax-free lifestyle doesn't apply to you. It only applies to them. Now, it does get a little funky with because, like I said, this is very complicated. Okay, it gets funky when you get into like the superstar paycheck earners, movie stars, um, hedge fund traders, professional hockey players, professional basketball players. They can easily make $1 million a year. Okay. An 18% tax is actually a big tax cut for them. But in the end, we still generate more income. Now we can correct that too. I would like to see, and some people say a luxury tax, but I think the flat tax already covers the luxury items. Like I buy Ford sedans, 40, $50,000. Okay. If I had to pay a consumption tax of 18%, okay, I'm paying, far less than like when I go to Los Gatos and see the tech bros driving their $2.2 million McLarens. When they buy their $2.2 million McLarens, they're going to pay 18% on 2.2 million, not on 40,000. Okay, they're going to be paying a hell of a lot. And I'm bringing this up because I don't know whether it would be more proper to do the flat tax as a consumption tax, a sales tax, a VAT, a Mehrwersteuer, or just do it as a flat revenue stream, revenue flow tax. Okay. I'd have to research and think about that a lot more to say which direction it goes. But I'm pretty confident right now the tax code we have is the source of most of our problems. It's not fair. It's not progressive. It creates debt by design and policy. Um, and also a lot of things that they're making money on, you're not taxing anyways. Okay. And there could be like carve outs for everybody, like truly your primary residence. You don't have to pay capital gains on a primary residence sale, but only your real primary residence. Okay. You can't do what Trump is accusing everybody under the sun of doing because he did it himself. Go read the Atlantic article. He did exactly what he's tried to indict Letitia James for 3 times, and they failed 3 times. Yeah, exactly what they're accusing Comey of James is exactly what Trump did. He signed up for 2 loans, claiming both the residents were his primary residence, and they even brought the receipts. Okay, if it's truly your primary residence, no matter if it's worth $100,000 or whether it's worth, you know, what's the house in San Francisco that just went for sale? It's $24 million, whatever it is. Okay, um, you flatten out and treat it as a real flow. If we don't, I don't think I can't think of how we fix this. I don't think we can fix this with the tax code we have. It's not just accounting for Matt's idea of ballooning up the MC and the UMC and just gaining more income. It's not enough. And it's not that Matt's idea is the problem. It's not. The problem is Ronald Reagan forward. It's the addiction to debt in this country. People want to go to war and have it both ways. They want to party like it's 1999 and they want to go out and they want to go shopping, but they also want to be at war, you know, spending about $1 trillion a year extra over budget for a decade. Okay. Again, that's how you got to $37 trillion. Okay. How do we retreat out of that? That's a totally valid question. I like the question. It's an important question. But Let's use that $1 million thing again. At 18%, that's $180,000. A crypto bro makes $1 million profit. We don't tax him because he bought Bitcoin, even though I think you're a lunatic if you buy Bitcoin. You might as well buy a pet rock or a beanie baby. Okay. But let's say you make $1 million in Bitcoin on a sale. Okay. You realized a profit. You made income. Okay. $180,000. Doesn't matter how you file your taxes, what your wealth is, you're going to be paying $180,000 on that $1 million. $1 million in capital gains. If it's not your primary residence, $180,000 per $1 million. Because right now, there's a lot of capital gain situations where they pay zero. Oh, a PE carry. Okay, you carried it. So what? I don't care. That's not the tax code anymore. It's money you made. It's income that's been realized. $180,000 on the million. Oh, you get a stock grant in the company? The second you option those stocks, you action them. You just actioned $1 million worth of stock your company granted to you as the CTO, the CFO, $180,000, regardless of what your income was that year. Okay. Because under a certain tax code, go ahead and give somebody $1 million bonus. Are you going to collect an income tax out of that? Maybe, maybe not. Because if you don't have the revenue for real, you can't pay down the debt. Okay. Oh, and if you decide that war on a credit card is your endless answer, from fucking Vietnam to Iraq to possibly Venezuela and China, forget the fucking debt. We're toast. We're dead. The dollar will collapse. Like I thought when we hit like 25, $30 trillion, people would start waking up and getting real about this. They got worse instead. The BBB is a perfect example of that. You literally got worse. It's like crackheads are in charge of the money in this country. I'd like to see everything stay flat, and I think the luxury tax is built into the flat tax, but we may also need a luxury tax. Not a luxury tax, I'm sorry. Luxury tax is built into the flat. What we may also need is a war tax. Um, if you want to go to war, then the war's cost is directly billed. We don't go in debt in for wars, or we minimize the debt minimally to go to war. We go to war, all incomes over, you probably have to make it a factorization because you don't want to put it at a fixed integer dollar count because of inflation. Um, so I'm thinking like if you took in more than 12x the median income in the country, then you're subject to a war tax. And that could be another 8-10%. Okay. You want to see America get anti-war pretty quick? You want to see the ruling class get anti-war really quick? Because they love wars. Because they're great distractions to the shit they're doing. And I'm convinced the only reason we're targeting Venezuela is the Epstein files. Look, squirrel. Yeah, it's one of those moments. Um, and if you did an all flow tax, you get about 3.2. If you do a consumption tax and you tax everything, including home purchases, everything else, yeah, outside your primary residence, you could be looking of upwards of 3.5 trillion, according to my rough numbers here. Okay, much more than the trillion you get from raising everybody's MC and UMC paychecks to a 31% increase. And I want to make it clear, my point here is not to squeeze the poor, the disabled, seniors, or the working poor. We need to liberate those folks. And we especially don't need to get into this dumb socialist policy. Oh, we must tax them, so we must give them a welfare program. How about stop taking money out of their pockets? And again, just go find the gaps after that. Because I've never had a problem with a social assistance package. There's a difference. Again, I lived in West Germany. I've gone all through Europe. I've seen a lot of the world. Okay. Like in Germany and Denmark, um, there isn't this crazy hostility towards people who need help. Okay. In Germany, they will literally give you a place to live, a stipend of money, and some food, and they also get you to a doctor and psychologist if you're having problems. Okay. That doesn't mean you don't have homeless. There's still homelessness. There's still mentally ill people who won't get treatment. There's still drug addicts who are strung out, but there's just a lot less of it. Okay. Our problem here in America is we literally think a police tank solves drug addiction. Now we think blowing up fishing boats and grabbing a tanker solves drugs, wins the drug war. Every day it's something dumber. It's like dumb, dumber, dumbest. That's the progression we seem to be stuck in. And going back to my McLaren versus what I buy as cars, I'm very utilitarian when it comes to cars. I just need an average car that takes me to A to B. I'm like driving a high end Mercedes doesn't like interest me or anything. I think the only kind of like cool, possibly expensive car I'd like if I could go find from a real, top end mechanic who's preserved like a 69 Shelby Mustang. And he said, yeah, I'll save the car. I've taken care of it all this year. It's just in perfect condition. I just repainted it, but I want my money back. All the money I put in all these years. I want $110,000 for the car. If I had $110,000 to spend, yeah, I'd easily buy a 69 Mustang Shelby, forest green with the white racing stripes, preferably. Or maybe a 72 Oldsmobile 442, the white with the sky blue racing panels. If they were true classic cars in perfect conditions, I'd spend serious money on that. But I'm not going out and buying like what's the new Cadillac? I can't even pronounce the model name. I saw a Cadillac for sale the other day. The fucking thing is like $212,000. I'm like, there's no way I'd buy that. No way in hell. But I go on. I pay cash for my cars usually. At least the last 3 or 4 cars I paid cash. Um, I drive the cars a long time too. My cars last at least 12 years. Um, Little dad financial advice: don't trade in your car every 2 or 3 years. You're just wasting money. And if you want to really save on a car, buy a 2-year-old car in really good condition. Because as soon as you drive it off the lot, you lose money. But let's say you drive a normal car like I do, Ford sedan. I pay $40,000 for the car. I'm going to pay $7,200 in the consumption tax. You buy the McLaren, you're going to pay $432,000 in taxes. Okay. Right now, they can buy a McLaren off of income and dividends and stock grant package. They're paying no taxes on whatsoever. And I don't begrudge anybody wealth. I seriously don't. Like, I have a couple of very, very wealthy friends, like founders of companies, like one of the early founders of one of the biggest database companies on the planet. Okay. He's rich. No, he's not rich. He's wealthy. Okay. And he's the nicest guy in the world. Charitable as all charitable. Yeah, he drives a really expensive Ferrari 308i. It's really nice. He gave me a ride in it. But he's one of the most charitable people I've ever met. This guy will whip out his checkbook in a heartbeat. Okay. And I have 2 or 3 friends like that. And colleagues who did really well in the tech industry, are really wealthy, and they're not like the people you see out there. In fact, the guy I'm talking about, He owns a ranch down in the South Bay, and he told me what he pays his husband and wife ranch manager that come up every year to take care of his property. He spends almost $300,000 a year on them. Full retirement, full health care benefits, the works. Okay. Um, so it's not like they don't have the money, they can't afford to do the big things, they can. But what we've done is we valued the escalation of an asset over the reality of an individual person and a worker. And that's where the tax code gets disturbing. That's where wealth gets disturbing to me. If you really saw a shift in the government finances, maybe we could have a more serious conversation about what our money does when we pay into the system. Okay. Can we stop having the false argument that even Reagan dissuaded? No, FICA is not the reason we have debt. FICA, Social Security, Medicare, that system has nothing to do with the general obligation debt. It's not what's taking the country down. Bullshit. Okay. That's not just my opinion. That's before Trump. That was their demigod, Ronald Reagan. Okay. Now I guess Ronald Reagan's a communist. Nixon is Satan. This is what happens when you just go to the right so far, you don't know where you are anymore. Because I think it is true that the wealthy do spend less on commodity, but what they spend on non-commodity is multiples of income of the average family, never mind the medium paychecker. Okay. So when you start taking into, I mean, what kind of taxes would Jeff Bezos have to pay on his yacht? How much did Jeff Bezos spend on his last yacht? And if we charged him the 18% consumption tax, what would he have paid in taxes? Okay. And remember how he gained his money um, to buy the yacht in the first place. He's not doing it through regular income. He's doing it through distributions, dividends, and capital gains, which again has a totally different tax footprint than your paycheck. Okay. When they say they don't want a flat tax, they know that they end up paying more. That's why they don't want it. That's why the ultra wealthy don't want it. Now, why the liberals and progressives don't want it? I think some of it is protectionism of the poor and working poor. I think that's honest and true. But another is they think they need to take their pound of flesh. Okay. And I've warned you about this. I've warned you about personas like Elizabeth Warren, who keeps creeping toward left wing authoritarianism. Okay. You can't write a decent tax code, so your answer is steal people's fixed assets. No, taxes have never worked like that in this country. The fact that we're in this problem is because you failed. You, Senator, failed across the board when it came from taxes and revenue. You gave away the farm. Now you want to go rob another farmer to fill the gap. No. The next time, either under consumption tax, the next time he buys a yacht, he pays 18% basis. Okay. The next time he cashes out a whole bunch of Amazon stock, he pays his 18%. He doesn't put it into this current tax code and end up paying a minimal amount, if not 0, 1, or 2%. That system we obliterate. Okay. Now, why liberals and conservatives mock this idea, I have no idea. Because your current progressive tax code, progressives, is anything but liberal. But you'll die on the vine screaming how you're not going to change the tax code. You're just going to start stealing people's assets. Okay, name a situation where asset seizures applied to the top of the food chain. Because that's not the way it worked in the drug war. We pull over working class people on the highway and take their money. We tackle working people at the airport and take their money. It happened here. Woman gets on a plane in San Francisco, flies to Las Vegas, was trying to fly to Las Vegas. They decided a wealthy widow who wants to go gambling is a drug trafficker because she had $12,000 in cash on her. She had $12,000 on cash on her because she was going gambling in Las Vegas. When is going to Las Vegas a crime? Okay. So tell me how Elizabeth Warren's stealing people's fixed assets would really work in the real world. Not the way she's claiming. That's so improbable. It's probably impossible to have an output of what she's claiming. So my thing is putting my foot down and saying, fix the goddamn tax code. Go back to my essay. The American dream was assassinated in 1978. There was a period where capitalism totally worked. And the taxes in that period were much higher than they were today. Capitalism totally worked. It was a fucking rock star. It was kicking the world's ass 1955 to 1970. And the corporate tax rate was a multiple of what it is today. So it isn't taxes per se on why businesses can't get ahead. Because we tax the crap out of you when capitalism was actually working. And all it did was made the middle class cheaper every year. From 1955 to 1970, it was cheaper every single year to become a member of the middle class or the upper middle class, the UMC. Okay. But it's all been downhill since 1981. More specifically, it's been downhill since Lee Atwater in the 78 midterms. That midterm and that political shift changed everything about America. And the post-Nixonian response was to separate the wealthy from the rest of America because we see how fragile the political system really is. Nixon didn't put his feet in the ground to stay in office and declare himself king. So the wealthy are at risk. The power structure is at risk. So they decided that all the money has to come to us. And that's what the left-right orthodoxy is all about. You have two parties that argue about everything, except where the money goes. Hillary Clinton's going to look out for the little guy after her 25 speeches at $100,000 a pop at the banks. Get fucking real. You have two parties acting in concert to make sure the wealthy get wealthier. And how do they do that? With our broken tax code. And the biggest thing, if we don't come up with some scheme to start paying down the debt, I don't know what the number is, but there's a finite limit that the economy and the financial structure can handle as a debt load. Because once you get into a problem where most of your revenue simply goes to pay debt interest, you're screwed. You can't pay for services anymore. That's a functional bankruptcy. Except nations don't go bankrupt. They go into currency crisis. I mean, probably everybody in this session right now would not like to wake up tomorrow morning and find out the dollar that's already been decayed through inflation over the years just lost another 20% in value because the banks And the real money in this country, I figured out the debt is unpayable. And that's the real risk of these foreign escapades like Venezuela. Okay. We're already at the cliff's edge. We're already in a serious financial crisis. The answer to that crisis, $4 trillion in debt in the first year of the second term of Donald Trump. 4 trillion. You start shooting in Venezuela proper, you spend $1 trillion before you can finish your second blink. You occupy Venezuela, you're going to be spending as much as we did in Iraq, Afghanistan, Djibouti, Somalia, Syria, Libya, Congo, Mali, and all the other places we toured through. Including the fact that Green Berets have been fighting the Filipino communists in the jungle for fucking so many years. And there's so much shit that the general public doesn't realize that we're always fighting something. Not to mention the Korean War never ended. We're on a war footing in the DMZ in Korea, along with our allies, over a war we couldn't win in 1950. It started in the 1950s. The last war we did win, Treaty of San Francisco, 1951. Officially ended in World War II. Okay. If we just stick with the tax code as it is, or we sit and do bullshit suggestions like Elizabeth Warren, I'm just going to steal Jeff Bezos's property. Yay! That doesn't cover the $37 trillion hole we've created. And that's the real thing. It's not Matt's idea or my suggestion or somebody else's suggestion. The problem is we're in a serious pickle. We don't have a debt problem. We have a colossal debt problem. And that's just talking about the national debt, forgetting all the state debt, all the county debt, all the muni debt. I live in a city with only 80,000 people. We have been $250 million in debt the entire time I've lived here. 2.5 decades I've lived here. We've never been in any condition other than $250 million in debt. 100 million in schools, 100 million in roads, 100 million in general obligation. And it never changes. Why? Because America is addicted to debt. We keep getting told that debt is good. It's not. The only debt in my wife and I's life is our home mortgage, and we're over $100,000 ahead on our mortgage. I don't have a car payment. I don't have credit card bills. I don't have personal loans. I don't own the bookie anything. I pay and tip my hookers up front. It was just a joke. Okay. But we're absolutely addicted to debt. So from muni to federal, you've got debt coming out of your freaking ears. Then you got to get into the corporate debt that they don't want to liquidate. They don't want to put into receivership. Very rarely do they follow the rules of capitalism. When something goes south in capitalism, what's your three answers? Bankruptcy, receivership, and liquidation. Bankruptcy, I can't pay my bills. Get a judge to affirm that. Receivership, I can't run my business. Assign a special master to run my business because I can't do it anymore, or I was just a moron pretending the whole time. Liquidation, sell the assets at the current fair market price. Okay. And write off the debt that's unpayable. That's liquidation. Okay. But everybody just wants to sell more debt. I get my mailbox, I would say in a given week, 6, 7 offers to go into debt every week. You take the ads on social media and on newspaper sites and stuff. Bitcoin, borrow money to go buy Bitcoin. No, that's some of the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Go borrow money to buy a Beanie Baby. What was it in the 70s? Pet rocks. I borrowed $100,000 so I could speculate on pet rocks. Okay. Bitcoin's no different. Okay. So the real problem isn't Mad ideas are my idea. The real problem is the addiction to debt, the volume of debt, and the reluctance to be real about what the debt means. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say, hey, you really have to start concentrating on the debt because the debt will only be solved if we don't start really taking action against it. The only way it's going to solve itself is a dollar crisis. And if you think you're struggling to pay your grocery bills and your rent and your car insurance or your fire insurance for your house, insurance is in real trouble. Three worst places: Florida, Texas, California. Three biggest economies. Well, Florida's the fourth, but top two economies having insurance problems. That's not good. Okay. Add that to the addiction of debt. Okay. Are we going to take a real action towards doing something about the debt? Or are we just going to shine on till a crisis occurs? And that crisis will involve at least a Great Recession, if not a Great Depression. If you did a flat 18% tax, the corporate tax bill the first year would go up by 2/3 of $1 trillion from what they actually pay now. You can print whatever statutory rate you want on a website. It's what they actually file and pay to the IRS that matters. And there's a massive gap. That's the gap since Reagan. You say the rate is here, they actually pay down here. You ignore the gap and take it out as a credit card loan. Well, now you've got a MasterCard that's got $37 trillion on it. Okay. Do we bust a move for real against the debt, or do we just keep shining this on? That's the real problem. Um, I do think, in just critical evaluation, not in any harsh criticism or anything, I just think a flat tax gets rid of the bullshit. Um, I think it's much, much more politically doable than trying to raise middle class and UMC salaries by 31%. And having a slow glide path isn't a real solution. Yes, I do think if we just raise salaries and collected more taxes, we'd have a slow path, a 50+ year path of paying off the debt. Does that really Oh, thank you, Priscilla. Does that really help us in the long term? Not with the risks that we're facing. Total amount of debt, all sources in America, that's a risk we're facing. The risk of a broken foreign policy and a military fronted bonanza that all it does is cost us $1 trillion every time we turn our head. Those are real risks. And the economy's shifting. So whatever we plan for now, a lot of the industries, the way they come out of this cycle, aren't going to be the same as we saw them in the past. Like multiple sources, not just Mr. Global, are going like, hey, oil prices are going down. Um, uh, are we looking at another glut? Because we had a massive glut like 30 years ago, and prices fell to the floor. Okay. Uh, you're not making any money off of companies who aren't making any money. You got no government revenue if they're literally not making any money. Because again, I'm not talking about taxing, I'm talking about taxing the profit and taxing it at a real rate where we can make real, meaningful, significant payments to change the debt curve from positive to negative. Because if we can't get the debt onto a negative curve over time, we're committing fiscal suicide. We will destroy the dollar. You see what the oil price is today. Yeah, WTI is at 58. So when they say, "Hey, rig counts are falling, oil prices are falling," yeah, the economy's shifting. Okay, what do we usually do when the economy shifts? We start handing out stuff. You got to stop doing that. And WTI is down 19% this year. No, oil prices are a great indicator, along with interest rates, of where the economy is going overall. Okay, how do you want to handle this problem? With sort of a fantasy, sort of the status quo, even if it doesn't solve the problems, we're just going to keep the status quo going. That ain't going to work. Okay, like I said, $37 trillion now. Is it 40? Is it 45? Is it 50 trillion before the dollar breaks? I don't know. What I'm saying is, I don't want to know. I want to change the director. The velocity is an upward track. I want to see a downward track. How do we get there? And I'm thinking a consumption or an income tax at a flat level is the only mathematically reasonable way to. Again, I'm not trying to create a utopia here. I'm trying to change the vector of a problem. I'm not even trying to solve it because it's not really solvable right now. I mean, it's going to take another technology breakthrough, and I don't know what that is. I don't think it's AI as it is right now, LLMs. Okay. LLMs are a functional tool. Okay. Whether you know it or not, you use AI every day and you have been for over a decade. Have you ever hit the view next button on Netflix? That's an ML process, machine learning. Your recommendation on your Amazon card or your Etsy card or whatever, that's a combination of machine learning, price valuations, and weighted search keywords fed into a natural language processing uh, algorithm. What you're interested in, at what price, at what availability, here's our recommendations. Those are baby forms of AI. Okay. Is AI going to be the technology that breaks us through? I don't think so. Okay. And I work with ML and AI, have been for years. I wrote a whole algorithm, ML based algorithm for autonomous countermeasures in a corporate email system. Automatically botnets, scanners, denial of service attacks, malware, ransomware, bad attachment senders, the works. It had every factor that you can imagine in a mail system as part of the weighted steps of the algorithm, and it was extremely good. It was a very very low false positive, false negative algorithm, and it truly works. Okay, even though I know, at least at some forms, we're going to get a good tool out of the LLM cycle. It's way over invested. That's clear. Yes, there is a lot of AI slop because people don't know how to use the tools. Um, when I see bad AI, I kind of have the same reaction that most people have. Okay. Um, but I've worked enough with the AI platforms and I run them right here on my work. I run them locally. I'm not signing on to a website to use it a lot. So I use ChatGTP online as a subscription, but like my LLM, my other LLMs, and all my AI generative art stuff, that's all running off my own workstation. My ML algorithms, my classifiers, stuff are running downstairs on my hypervisor. Okay. That's probably not going to be it though. Fusion energy is probably our most likely out to this fiasco because if you can drop the price of energy by a factor of 1 over 10 or 1 over 20, it would completely revise, change, revectorize the entire economy. It's sort of like a Gene Roddenberry scenario in Star Trek. The reason why they have a utilitarian society in Star Trek universe is because they have essentially free energy in the warped cores. Okay, they have energy to matter conversion at a limitless scale, at a star level scale. They take in the energy of a star and put it into an engine. Okay, we're not gonna get there for a few more thousand years, if at all. But there's a chance we may get fusion. Now, the funny thing about fusion is, since the 1970s, it's always 20 years away. So it could be still 20 years away now. But if somebody makes a breakthrough with fusion energy, that could be a changer. Okay. But those are kind of like lotto solutions, hoping that as this technology just arrives, like somebody just walks aimlessly and figures out AGI, like Commander Data and Star Trek Next Generation, or HAL 9000 and 2001: A Space Odyssey, or his sister SAL 9000. That's why I call Chat GTP SAL 9000, because reminds me of Sal from the Space Odyssey books. Um, Even though I know LLMs are not AGI, they're not even close. We're not even in the neighborhood of Commander Data. Okay. So these are kind of lotto solutions. So I think we need a more practical. Now, if we're working toward revectorizing to a downward trend, and we happen to run into the next greatest technology that that solves our problem, because look how the economy changed when we discovered coal. Look how the economy changed when we decided to start drilling for oil. We knew what oil was. We productionalized it in the 1800s. Um, and still today, I like, it's amazing what oil is. You take a barrel of oil, that is 12 man years of energy for $58. Okay. That is one of the most incredible energy sources outside of uranium and plutonium. Now, our economy would be doing much better if we had a better energy policy, like we actually got ahead of the game after 9/11 and built more nuclear power plants. Because, yes, we do need to build more nuclear power plants. They're the greenest, um, safest for the environment per gigawatt of electricity produced. Nuclear is the answer as the baseline, except thus, like, we don't handle the debt, we also haven't handled energy properly as a policy. Okay. So I don't want to wait for these magical mystery technologies to save us. It's like waiting for Superman to come down and, take out the bad guy. Could it happen? Maybe. Okay. But more likely, we're going to have to start fixing things ourselves. And if something good happens, like we figure out fusion, fusion would be awesome. For every watt you put in, you get 10 or 20 watts out. Would change everything. Would change the whole prospect of building these new data centers. Okay. And that's part of the problem why LLMs aren't the answer. They just take way too much electricity. Even with the new A6, the tensor chips, we're building all tensor chip data centers now that are not GPUs, that use a tiny fraction of the energy. Even that energy is incredible. We are at least, this is how bad our energy problem is. We are at least behind by 20 to 24 nuclear reactors of energy. We should, when they drove the planes into the buildings in 9/11, one of the first responses should have been a working group that looked back with T. Boone Pickens. We should have been doing P. Boone Pickens' idea, turning the grid into the new Eisenhower interstate system, taking windmills and putting windmills everywhere we could from North Texas to the Dakotas, and then start popping in nuclear power plants at all the centers we know are going to be our next generation manufacturing centers. California, Oklahoma, Texas, Arizona, Ohio, Indiana. Those nuclear power plants should already be built there and should already be at the ready. Instead, we're burning diesel fuel in Memphis to power Elon's Grok. That doesn't make any sense, especially considering what Grok is. Is it a decent chatbot? Is it a decent research tool? Some of the mods, pretty good coding tools. Yeah, yeah. But is it Commander Data or HAL or SAL 9000? No. Is it going to be? No. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. We should be coming up with a more straightforward, reasonable plan to change the debt profile in the country. And then we have the hardest thing, and this is even worse than the debt volume problem, this is where I'll leave it off today, is the psychology of debt has to be fixed. Because debt hides a whole bunch of problems and a whole bunch of corruption. You have data centers right now, which major labels, tech labels are building, selling off to finance companies and renting it back to themselves so they don't have to take the hit on their ledger. So they don't have to say how much they spent this quarter in the quarterly call for their stock, for their equity. Okay. The whole psychology of debt has to be changed. Credit cards aren't an endless debt situation. They're a money management tool. I haven't carried a balance on my credit card in 30 fucking years. Okay. I can't write off the credit card interest. If I need to give myself a loan, I use the HELOC, the home equity line of credit. So at least I can write that interest off. Before I started paying cash for cars, that's how I paid for family cars. Is I just took it out of the HELOC and paid myself back in like 12 to 18 months and wrote off the interest on my taxes. Okay. I don't take out new car loans every 2 years. I don't carry interest on my credit cards. I balance on my credit card and pay interest, ridiculous interest every month. Okay. I go to the city hall and I tell them directly, you're fucking idiots the way you manage money. If all we can be is in debt, how the hell is any of this working? You're going to sit on endless debt and then you're going to sit there and go, well, I support a pay raise for the police officers and the firemen. Well, I'd like to give them a pay raise because inflation is killing everybody. Okay. But again, blood from a turnip. How do you give money when you're dead broke? Where's the more money? The more money is more debt. That's the psychology I'm speaking to. The psychology of debt is broken. There's a difference between debt and working capital. We're addicted to debt. We don't give a shit about working capital 99% of the time. That's where we win a foul. Okay. So, I'll tag Mr. Global when I put this up because he said, "Hey, anybody want to talk about this?" Yeah, I do want to talk about this. Maybe I'll have a conversation with him if he wants to. But please think about this. I think it's one of the most important things is how do we fairly run a tax code without crushing the poor and the working poor, the disabled and seniors on a fixed income, and how do we get the ultra wealthy to pay their fair fucking share, which isn't just a bunch of word salad mixed up vocabulary and a shine on, and in the end, they're only paying, like the Panama Papers prove, they're only paying 1, 2, or 3%. Okay. Think about my flat tax idea. If you have a comment or you have some articles or some research that will help both of us understand it, I'm more than welcome to research forward. Please put your comments. And until next time, think about it. Peace.